The Gundestrup Cauldron, a unique find dug out of a bog in Denmark. So why is this cauldron so important then? And what exactly does it tell us? So today then we're going to look at the story and the imagery on the Gundestrup Cauldron and see just exactly what we can find out. The Gundestrup Cauldron was found in 1891 and was dug out of a bog in Denmark near the hamlet of Gundestrup, hence the name, the Gundestrup Cauldron. Now when this cauldron was found, it wasn't found in just one complete piece. It was found with all the pieces making up the sides of the cauldron stacked within the base plate. So clearly it hadn't just been discarded. It looks as though this cauldron had been carefully placed there. Could this have been an attempt to hide this cauldron away from an invading army? Or maybe it had just seen the end of its days as a sacred vessel and was now being placed in a bog as an offering to the gods. And depositing sacred and valuable items in a bog wasn't unusual for the Celts. The bogs were neither land nor water. It was somewhere in between, and it was water, they believed, that formed the boundary between this world and the other world. So what better place to make an offering to the gods than the place that formed the boundary between the two worlds? It's interesting to note that the artwork on the cauldron is not typical of that of the Celts. This artwork in design and style is more similar to that of the Thracians, and Thracia is that area that is now occupied by countries such as Bulgaria, Turkey, and Greece. Although this appears to be Thracian workmanship, most of the designs and imagery are quite clearly Celtic. And then we have to ask, what is a Thracian cauldron doing up in Denmark? Scholars from academia have come up with a number of scenarios of how this could be. The first and most obvious is that the cauldron was a gift from one tribe to another. But then there's another theory that's very interesting, and this theory is proposed by the archaeologists and scholars Taylor and Bergquist. And they suggest that this cauldron was actually commissioned from the Thracians by the Celtic tribe called the Scoldisci. According to their theory, the Scoldisci came under attack by another tribe, another Celtic tribe called the Cimbri. Now, although the Cimbri were successful in their attacks against the Scoldisci, they themselves came under attack from the Romans, and it was their retreat from the Romans that pushed them up north towards Denmark, and with them they took the loot and spoils from the battles with the Scoldisci. And according to this theory, one of those spoils was the Gundestrup Cauldron. Now, this is just a theory of Taylor and Bergquist. It, at the moment, can neither be proven or denied. All we know is that the cauldron ended up in a peat bog in Denmark, and it appears that the workmanship on this cauldron was of Thracian design. So let's now take a look at some of the imagery on this cauldron and see what it is that's so special about it. So the cauldron itself measures 27 inches in diameter and 70 inches in height. And as I said, the cauldron was found dismantled, and it was made up of 7 external plates and 5 internal plates, plus a base plate. The images that we see around the exterior of the cauldron appear to be those of Celtic gods and goddesses. It's thought that originally there were 8 external plates, but one of them appears to be missing, although some have suggested that there were only ever 7 plates, and that they were spaced out around the exterior of the cauldron. So let's start off by first looking at the internal base plate of the cauldron. This plate contains the image of a bull, and above him is a woman wielding a sword. And there are 3 dogs on this plate, one above the head, one beneath the hooves, and a third dog, which the engraving is very faint, which appears to be dead. At the bull's head is a place for the horns. Now the horns are missing. Either they corroded, or they just simply weren't found with the rest of the cauldron. The bull appears to be dead, so this then would be a typical bull slaying scene of the era, such as we often see with the Roman Mithras slaying the white bull. So now we'll move on to the exterior plates. And on the first plate, plate A, we see an image of a bearded man, and in each hand he holds a figure of a much smaller man. Each of the smaller figures reach upwards and appear to be holding a bow. Under the feet of each of the smaller figures are 2 other figures, and on the left side we see a dog, and on the right there's an image of a winged horse. In plate B we see another god, and this god is holding sea dragons, one in each hand. Around his neck is the torque, and below is an image that appears to be 2 smaller figures fighting with another sea creature. In plate C, we see another bearded male figure. On the left-hand side is a smaller figure in a boxing position, and on his other side, a man in a leaping position, as though again engaged in some form of combat. Below this, we see another figure of a small horseman riding off somewhere into the distance. In exterior plate D, we have yet another god, and this time the god is holding up 2 stags by the hindquarters. Now, exterior plate E is slightly different. In this image, we see a female figure, and she appears to be a goddess, and she's flanked on either side by 2 male figures, each with their hands raised. And I think it interesting that we see these figures flanked on either side of this goddess. The way they hold their hands, each of them with their hands up as if to call down divine power, is the same image as we see on all of the other plates of the gods. Although some may be holding things in their hands, they all have their hands held upright. And why is it that this goddess is flanked by what are clearly depictions of 2 gods? Does this tell us that the gods themselves are subordinate to this goddess? We know that the Celts had a mother goddess, and she was the goddess of the earth itself. And so it's quite feasible that this is a depiction displaying the subordinate position of the gods to the Great Mother. On plate F, we have another image of a goddess. In her right hand, she holds a small bird. Now, there are those that say that this bird is the first cuckoo of spring, and so they conclude that this symbolism on this plate is all about fertility and spring. But then there are others, and myself included here, that see something different in this plate. And mythology, the likes of the birds of Rhiannon, comes immediately to mind. The birds of Rhiannon, it was said, were able to awaken the dead and lull the living to sleep. Now, it's well understood that the Celts believed in the concept of transmigration of souls, in other words, reincarnation. And so a reinterpretation of the mythology of the birds of Rhiannon would tell us that Rhiannon was the goddess that was responsible for escorting the dead to the underworld and then releasing their souls to start their journey back to rebirth and a new life. And if we look closer at this image and we look at the bottom, we see what could easily be seen as symbolic of the underworld, where Rhiannon, or this goddess figure, is cradling a man with her left hand, and to his right lies a dead dog. On her right side, we see another smaller female figure. On close examination, bears a very close resemblance to the goddess we see in the larger figure. And again, she's holding her left hand in the same cradling position as she is in the larger depiction. Above this smaller figure of the goddess is another larger feline figure that's reaching up to touch one of the birds that flanks Rhiannon's right-hand side. And it's these two birds flanked either side of the goddess that I think highly significant. And I think that the whole plate may be interpreted as the goddess cradling the dead in the underworld with her left arm, and in her right arm she releases the souls back from the underworld, with the two birds flanked above, symbolic of the release of the soul back to start their journey into a new life and rebirth. And this seems to fit very well within the mythology of the birds of Rhiannon, the same goddess that the Romans may well have referred to as Rigatona, the Great Queen. So moving on to exterior plate G, and here we have another female figure. In this plate, she has her hands crossed, and to her right and our left, we see an image of a man who appears to be fighting a lion. To her left-hand side is another leaping figure, and this image makes it a little more clearer, and we can see this leaping figure is very similar to the image that we saw on plate C. And that is the seventh and the last of the exterior plates. Now, all of these plates appear to show images of gods and goddesses. There were 4 gods and 3 goddesses. Now, if it's correct that there's a missing plate, perhaps that extra missing plate would have been another image of a goddess. But as for now, we don't know. So we have 5 interior plates, and we label them A through to E. And this is the first, and perhaps the most famous of the plates. And this is the famous image of Kanonos, or Kanunos, however you wish to pronounce it. And Kanonos simply means horned god. And in this image, he's holding in his right hand a torque, a symbol of authority, a Celtic symbol of authority. He also wears one around his neck. In his left hand, he holds the rammed-headed serpent. And the serpent is symbolic of many things, one of them being regeneration. And this is due to the way the serpent sheds its skin and appears to be reborn. And therefore it was seen to be a symbol of the Celtic belief in life, death, and rebirth. But it was also symbolic of knowledge and the underworld. And this is due to the fact that they saw that the serpent was always appearing from holes and cracks from under the ground. And one of the ways to enter the underworld, they believed, was through the holes and caverns that led them down into the underworld. And this underworld was also seen as a place of wisdom and knowledge. And this is because this was the resting place of the ancestors. And it was all the ancestors combined that formed the source of all knowledge and wisdom within the Celtic world. We also see in this image that he has to accompany him a stag and a whole host of other wild creatures. And this would seem to suggest that Kanonos was seen to be a god of the wild and the creatures of the wild. On plate B, we have another female figure, presumed to be another goddess, and she's flanked either side by what seem to be 2 elephants, and by the feet of the elephants, again on either side, are 2 6-spoke wheels. Now these 6-spoke wheels could be symbolic of the chariot that some believed towed the sun across the skies. But they could also have been representative of the seasonal cycle. Below her are 2 griffins and a wolf. Now the elephants and the griffins we would more commonly see as being that of Thracian design. However, the torque and the wheels are quite clearly Celtic. Interior plate C has at its centre a male bearded figure with his hands outstretched and raised, again assumed to be another depiction of a god. In his right hand he's holding what seems to be a broken wheel, and he's sharing this wheel with another figure, a female figure with a horned helmet. Then down beneath her, at her feet, there is another ram's-headed serpent. And to the right there are 2 more griffins, and the left a 3rd griffin. Above and either side of the goddess figure, there are 2 dogs or wolves, and it's interesting to see that they are walking in the opposite direction to that of the griffins beneath. Now there are some that consider that the figure that's in the middle, the male bearded figure, is the image of the sky god Tyrannus. But this is based purely on the fact that this god is holding a wheel, and the wheel was associated and symbolic of the chariot that pulled the sun across the sky. Interior plate D has the same motive repeated across the plate, and this motive is a man slaying a bull. Now the number 3 crops up rather a lot in the Celtic world, and it's believed that this number was sacred to the Celtic people. So I suspect that although there's some meaning behind the image itself, the fact that it was repeated 3 times is quite appropriate. At the top and above the bull, there seems to be a cat-like figure that's leaping from the horns to the back, and below, at the feet of the bull, is a dog that's running off to the left. Also interesting to note that between the legs of each bull, a branch, and on this branch appear 3 leaves. So again, the sacred number 3 is reinforced. And coming at the top of the neck of the bull, another branch, again with 3 leaves. So the sacred number 3 being reinforced by another triplicity. The fact that the image itself is in triplicate, and also the fact that we have 2 other triplicities, the branch between the feet and the branch at the neck. Now this brings us on to our last and final plate, interior plate E. And in this scene, we see what appear to be a number of soldiers marching forward, and they're met by a much larger figure, which seems to be dipping them headfirst into a cauldron. Then above there are 4 figures riding away on horseback. Now this again is a very interesting scene, especially when we consider the story of Branwen in the Mabinogi. And within this story, there's a scene that tells us how the dead and dying soldiers were placed within the cauldron of rebirth to bring them back to life so that they could fight again. This image seems to depict that scene very well. We see on the bottom they're quite clearly soldiers, and at the rear of these soldiers are 3 men holding the Carnex, and the Carnex was the horn that they used when they went into battle. They're being met at the front by a dog, perhaps a guardian of the underworld, and then placed by the larger figure, possibly depicting a god, who is then placing the unfortunate victim into the cauldron before being brought back to life, placed on a horse to fight again. So that then is the imagery and story of the Gundestrup Cauldron. And if you've liked today's discussion, then don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And with that, I'll see you again very soon on the next one.